My father chose the moment I was reaching for the salt. He set his fork down with this little clink that somehow cut through the scrape of plates and the hum of the dishwasher. When I looked up, he wasn't smiling anymore. His eyes locked on mine, and he leaned back in his chair like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "You owe us your success," he said. "It's time you paid the family back." For a second, nobody breathed. My mother's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. Then she gave this quick, jerky nod like she'd been rehearsing it. Across the table, my brother Ethan smirked into his mashed potatoes, and his wife Jenna stared down at her napkin as if she wished she could disappear into it. The dining room smelled like roast beef and rosemary, just like every special occasion dinner we'd ever had in that house. Same heavy oak table, same framed photos of Ethan's trophies on the wall, same too-bright chandelier buzzing faintly above us. Nothing had changed, and somehow everything had. I set the salt shaker down slowly. "I'm sorry," I said. "I owe you what?" Dad sighed like I was being deliberately obtuse. He reached under his chair, pulled out a manila folder, and slid it across the table toward me. It stopped just short of my plate, teetering on the edge of the placemat. "You're doing well now," he said. "You finally made it. We all sacrificed for that. Your mother and I are getting older. The mortgage, the bills, and your brother's been going through a rough patch with his business. It's time you stepped up. Family takes care of family." Mom finally found her voice. "We're not asking for the world," she added quickly. "Just a reasonable contribution. You know we always believed in you." I glanced at Ethan. He didn't even bother to hide his satisfaction. His arm was draped over the back of Jenna's chair, fingers drumming casually, like this was all just a formality. Like I was a bank being informed of an automatic withdrawal. "What's this?" I asked, tapping the folder. "Just something to make it official," Dad said. "So there are no misunderstandings later. You'll help with the house payment, and we'll work out a plan to get Ethan out of this hole. It's not charity. You're just giving back after everything we did for you." Jenna shifted in her seat, her eyes flickering from me to the folder and back again. She opened her mouth, then closed it, pressing her lips together. Whatever she was thinking, she clearly knew better than to say it here. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, but my voice came out steady. "Years of practice, I guess. You drew up an agreement," I said slowly, "for how much I'm supposed to give you." Dad shrugged. "Just numbers. You make good money. You won't even feel it. We talked it through, your mother and I. It's fair. Fair." That word sat between us like something rotten. I didn't reach for the folder. Instead, I reached into my own bag, hanging on the back of my chair. My fingers found the single folded page I'd slipped in there before I left my apartment. The paper was smooth and worn at the same time, the crease in the middle soft from being opened and refolded more times than I cared to count. I placed it on the table beside his folder, aligned neatly with the edge of my placemat. Just one sheet. No tabs, no clips, no impressive thickness. It looked small and harmless next to the bulging manila envelope of their agreement. Mom frowned. "What's that?" "Just something I brought," I said. "In case this conversation ever happened." Ethan snorted. "Oh, come on," he said. "Is this really necessary?" I ignored him. Instead, I looked at my father. Really looked at him. His hair was thinner now, more gray than brown. The lines around his mouth had deepened into grooves that tugged his lips downward, even when he wasn't scowling. But his eyes were exactly the same as when I was a kid, cold when he wanted something, warmer when he didn't. He stared at the paper like it offended him just by existing. "What is this supposed to be?" he asked. "Before I open your folder," I said quietly, "I think we should be clear about what we all mean when we talk about owing each other. About sacrifices. Investments." He bristled. "We're not here to argue. We're here to get on the same page." "Oh, we will," I said. "But first, there's something you seem to have forgotten." The room felt smaller somehow, the walls closer. The ticking clock in the hallway suddenly sounded too loud, like it was counting down to something we'd never be able to undo. Mom shifted in her chair. "This is getting dramatic," she murmured. "Can't we just—" I held up a hand. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "I'm here to be honest. You brought paperwork. So did I. The difference is mine is from years ago." Dad narrowed his eyes, looking from my face to the folded sheet. "What are you talking about?" I rested my fingertips lightly on the paper. My hand wasn't shaking. Somehow that surprised me. "This," I said, "is the one paper you forgot about." Jenna's gaze snapped to it. Ethan's smirk faltered, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. Mom's knuckles whitened around her wine glass. I don't like your tone, Dad said slowly. I know, I replied. You're used to me having a different one. For a few seconds, we just sat there, the four of us and that single, unassuming page. A lifetime of swallowed words pressed against the back of my teeth. I could have dumped everything out right there. The whole story, the years of being second choice, the missing money, the quiet research that led me to that document. Instead, I took a breath and chose my moment. Before I opened it, I asked him one simple question. Are you sure you want to talk about who owes who, Dad? He opened his mouth to answer, but in my mind, I was already somewhere else, back in a smaller body at this same table, staring at the difference between my plate and my brother's. To understand why that one sheet of paper mattered so much, you'd have to go back to when I first learned I was worth less than my brother. If you really want to understand that dinner, you have to see the house the way I grew up seeing it. From the front door, the first thing anyone noticed was the wall of framed photos lining the hallway. My mother called it the family gallery, but it might as well have been Ethan's personal museum. Team photos, action shots of him mid-jump shot, him in a too-big blazer holding some certificate. If you looked closely, you could find me somewhere in the background of a few group pictures, smiling from the second row. But there were no frames with just me in them. My achievements lived in drawers and email inboxes, not on walls. Birthdays were where the pattern felt the loudest, that I still remember Ethan's 13th. He tore into a big, glossy box at the table and pulled out the newest gaming console, the one every kid at school was talking about. He hooped, jumped up, ran around the table to hug Dad. Everyone laughed. When it was my turn a few months later, my pile of presents was smaller and softer. A backpack, a stack of notebooks, a calculator. Useful things. Responsible things. Wow, thanks, I said, trying to sound as excited as Ethan had. Mom beamed. We knew you'd appreciate something practical, she said. You're our sensible one. Not like your brother, who'd forget his own head if it wasn't attached. Dad chuckled and ruffled Ethan's hair anyway. Hey, that scatterbrain is going to be our future CEO, he said proudly. You'll keep us all organized, right, kiddo? You don't need much. You don't need much. That was my label. Not the smart one, not the kind one, not even the difficult one. I was the child it was convenient to overlook. When guests came over, the script rarely changed. Dad would clap a hand on Ethan's shoulder and say, "This one's our star athlete, our big shot in the making." Then, as an afterthought, his other hand would land on my back. "And this is our responsible one. Always so independent. Never asks for anything." Adults smiled approvingly at that, like my lack of needs was a virtue instead of a survival strategy. I did ask sometimes. Quietly. I remember being 12, standing in the kitchen while Mom scrubbed a pan. "Mom, do you think I could maybe take art classes this summer?" I asked. "There's this program at the community center." She didn't look up. "Honey, you know your brother's tuition isn't going to pay itself," she said, rinsing under hot water. "We have to prioritize. You understand, right? Art is nice, but your brother's got real potential." There it was again. Potential. As if I'd been born with a clearance sticker stamped on my forehead. Another time, in 9th grade, I lingered in the electronics aisle at the store, fingers brushing a basic MP3 player. Nothing fancy, just something to listen to music on the bus. When I showed it to Mom, her mouth tightened. "I wish we could, sweetheart," she said, voice soft but firm. "But every little bit counts. Do you want your brother to be saddled with loans before he even starts his life? You don't, do you?" Of course I didn't. So I put the box back on the shelf and told her it was no big deal. On the drive home, Ethan sprawled in the back seat with his new basketball shoes in his lap, talking about how sick they looked and how he couldn't wait to show his friends. In our living room, the coffee table was always cleared for Ethan's trophies. Plaques with shiny plates, little golden figures frozen mid-swing or mid-kick. Mom dusted them like they were religious relics. My certificates, honor roll, spelling bees, essay contests, were stacked in a manila envelope in the sideboard drawer. "Don't be silly," she'd say if I hesitated. "Those aren't things you display. They're for your records." High school made the divide official. By then, I'd figured out that attention came to Ethan whether he did well or not, and I had to earn every glance. I buried myself in textbooks, stayed up late doing extra credit, took whatever advanced classes the school would let me in. Nobody posted about honor societies on Facebook the way they did about big games, but I told myself it would matter later. Awards night was held in the overheated auditorium. The kind of place where the chairs squeaked if you breathed too deeply. Kids fidgeted in wrinkled dress clothes while parents craned their necks for a better view. Ethan was there for a most improved mention on the basketball team. I was there because my guidance counselor had hinted I might be getting some good news. They did the sports awards first. The gym teacher mispronounced Ethan's last name, but Dad cheered like he'd just been drafted. Ethan jogged up the steps, grinning, took the certificate, waved it toward our row like it was a trophy. The academic awards came later, after half the parents had checked out mentally. When they called my name for a renewable scholarship, real money, enough to make a dent in tuition, the applause was polite but thin. I walked up, accepted the folder, shook a stranger's hand. The principal moved on. In the car afterward, my scholarship letter lay in my lap, the numbers swimming in my vision. I'd done it. All the late nights, the lunch breaks spent in the library, the weekends working through practice tests. It had actually turned into something tangible. Dad looked at Ethan in the rearview mirror. "Nice job out there," he said. "That coach really sees something in you." Ethan shrugged modestly. "It's no big deal." I waited for someone to bring up my scholarship. Mom glanced back at me, then at the letter. "So what exactly is that?" she asked. "It covers a lot of tuition," I said. "Like a lot. It's a merit scholarship. They said it's competitive." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, that's nice," she said. "Every little bit helps, right? But don't get ahead of yourself. It's not like it's real money yet. We'll still have to make big sacrifices." Dad nodded. "Yeah, it's just a little help. Your brother's situation is more concrete. He'll need us to support him if he's going to make something of this." Then they were off, talking about club fees and training camps and summer leagues. I pressed my fingers into the thick paper of the scholarship folder and watched streetlights wash over Ethan's reflection in the window, his minor sports mention already turned into a family legend. That night, sitting on my bed with the letter spread out in front of me, the numbers felt smaller than they had in the auditorium. Somehow, my win had already been framed as a discount on my own worth, not an investment in my future. I learned the lesson early. In our house, resources weren't about need or effort. They were about narrative. Ethan was the protagonist. I was supporting cast. Love was something you auditioned for by staying useful and staying quiet. So I adapted. I stopped asking for extras. I learned to say, "It's okay, I don't need it," before anyone could say no. I took pride in being low maintenance because it was the only kind of praise I reliably got. Back then, I thought it was unfair. I didn't know it was also financial fraud. Senior year, the kitchen table turned into a negotiation desk. It was a Tuesday night, the cheap overhead light buzzing faintly, casting a yellow halo over the chipped wood. My college brochures were spread out in a fan, logos, smiling students, manicured lawns. I'd lined them up by how realistic I thought they were, the dream schools on one end, the "I'll go if I have to" options on the other. Dad sat across from me, elbows planted, fingers steepled under his chin like some budget version of a CEO. A single folded sheet of paper lay between us. "We need to be realistic," he said. "We can't give you what we gave your brother, but we'll cover what we can. We're not monsters." The way he said it made it sound generous, like he was offering me something extra, not dialing down the bare minimum. I glanced at the paper, then at his face. "What is it?" I asked. "Just a routine thing," he said. "Financial aid form, authorization, that kind of stuff. The school needs parental information. It'll help you qualify for more. Sign here, and we'll take care of the rest." I didn't understand half the jargon, but there was my name printed neatly at the top, my date of birth, our address. It looked official. My guidance counselor had mentioned there would be forms. I wanted to believe this was good news. "So you're helping?" I asked, still cautious. Dad sighed like the question offended him. "Of course we're helping. Didn't we always say we'd help if you did your part? You got that scholarship, didn't you? This just fills in the gaps." Mom, washing dishes at the sink, chimed in without turning around. "Your brother's tuition nearly killed us," she said. "We can't do that again. But we're not throwing you to the wolves." He slid a pen across the table. The blue ink glinted under the light. "Where do I sign?" I asked, right there. His finger tapped the line without hesitation. "We'll handle the boring stuff. You just focus on school." So I signed. The pen felt heavy for something so ordinary. My signature looked small and hopeful on that line. When I pushed the paper back, he folded it quickly, slipped it into a manila envelope already bulging with other documents. The whole thing disappeared into his briefcase. See, he said, we always take care of you. I carried that sentence with me like a fragile gift when I left for college. It lasted about 3 months. The first bill hit my inbox in October. I was in the cramped computer lab between classes, fluorescent lights humming, the smell of burnt coffee soaking the air. The subject line said, "Payment due student account." I clicked, expecting to see a small remaining balance after scholarships and whatever help my parents had promised. Instead, there was a number so big it made my stomach flip. Beside it, a line that read, "Current loans accepted. List." I scrolling past loan types I'd never heard of, interest rates that seemed like a bad joke. The parent contribution line was a flat, indifferent 0. I called home that night from my narrow dorm bed, the springs creaking as I shifted. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "I got a bill today, and it says everything's loans. I thought you said you were helping." Dad's answer came quickly, sharper than I expected. "We are helping. We filled out that aid form, didn't we? You got more loans because of that. That's us doing our part." "That's debt," I said slowly. "I thought you meant." "We're not made of money," he snapped. "You should be grateful you got anything at all. Your brother didn't have scholarships. We had to pay full price for him. Remember that." Mom took the phone then, voice coated in sugar. "Sweetheart, a little debt builds character," she said. "And we already did the big wedding for your brother, paid for his tuition, his apartment. We can't afford everything for both kids. You understand, right?" I understood that I was on my own. By sophomore year, my schedule looked less like a student's and more like a juggler's. Classes in the morning, work-study in the afternoon, swiping meal cards at the dining hall, then closing shifts at a coffee shop off-campus 3 nights a week. On weekends, I did freelance tutoring for high school kids whose parents could afford to pay me in cash. Meanwhile, Ethan was posting photos from his fully furnished off-campus apartment. New car in the driveway, courtesy of Mom and Dad. Captions like "Grind never stops," under pictures of him lifting weights or lounging on the couch with a game on in the background. When I came home for breaks, the comparisons were built into the conversation. "How's school?" Dad would ask, in that tone that suggested he already knew the answer. "Busy," I'd say. "I'm working a lot." "Well, that's what adults do," he'd reply. "You think your brother didn't work hard? We saw his effort, that's why we backed him. He's our investment. We expect a return." The first time he said that, I laughed uneasily. "What does that make me?" I asked. "A side project?" His eyes hardened. "Don't start," he said. "You got scholarships. You're costing us less. That's a good thing. Be grateful." Grateful. For waking up at 5 to cram for an exam, because my shift didn't end until midnight. For calculating how many hours I'd have to work to cover a surprise textbook fee. For listening to my classmates complain about their parents hovering over their finances while I quietly checked my account balance and prayed my debit card wouldn't decline. Whenever I tried to bring up the supposed college fund they'd always mentioned when I was younger, the story shifted. "It ran out," Mom would say vaguely, waving a hand. "We had to use some of it earlier. Things came up. Life happens." "What things?" I asked once, pressing. She frowned. "Do you know how much your brother's tuition was? His car. His wedding. We already did the big stuff. You'll understand when you have kids." The message was clear. My expectations were the problem, not their redistribution of resources. So I adjusted my expectations downward. I stopped asking for help, because every request came with a history lesson about Ethan's expenses and my supposed discounts. I took on more hours, skipped social events, let myself drown quietly in paperwork and payments. I told myself this was adulthood, that maybe this was just how it was for people like me. Some kids got parents as safety nets. Others got loans and lectures. I figured I'd just been unlucky. I thought the difference was just favoritism and bad luck. I didn't know there was more money in my name than in my pockets. By my mid-20s, my life finally felt like it belonged to me, even if it was held together with duct tape and spreadsheets. I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment over a laundromat, the kind of place where the walls were thin, but the rent was just barely within reach. The paint was slightly uneven, the floor creaked near the bathroom, and the pipes made noises in the winter, but it was mine. My name on the lease, my key on the ring, my choice of what hung on the walls. During the day, I worked as a junior software developer at a mid-sized company downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I took the early train in, headphones on, coffee cooling in my hand while I read documentation and bug reports on my phone. I stayed late more often than not, pushing through tickets and side projects, knowing that every tiny raise and promotion meant another step away from the financial cliff I'd been born on. Without a safety net, I learned to catch myself that I tracked every dollar in a color-coded spreadsheet, watching numbers crawl slowly in the right direction. Debt going down in small, stubborn increments, savings building up like dripping water in a bucket. I picked up freelance work on the side, small websites for local businesses, debugging contracts on weekends. I learned the difference between wanting something and needing it, between I can't afford it, and I'm choosing not to. There were no surprise checks from home. No, just because deposits. There were, however, overdraft alerts and nights when I refreshed my bank app 3 times before bed to make sure an automatic payment had cleared. But there were also birthday nights in cramped restaurants, surrounded not by people who thought of me as an investment, but by people who knew me as a person. My friend group had been assembled piece by piece. A coworker who'd become my lunch buddy, a neighbor who borrowed sugar and never gave it back but always invited me over for movie nights, a college acquaintance who understood what it meant to juggle bills and dreams at the same time. Somewhere along the way, I met Alex, my partner, who showed up with homemade soup when I got sick and never once made me feel like a liability. On my 26th birthday, we all crammed into my tiny living room. Someone brought a lopsided cake. Someone else brought mismatched candles. We balanced plates on our knees and sat on cushions on the floor because I only owned 4 chairs. The air was warm from bodies and laughter, the window fogging slightly from the heat. When they sang Happy Birthday, it was off-key and earnest. After I blew out the candles, Alex nudged my shoulder. Speech, they said. Come on. You made it another year without spontaneously combusting. I rolled my eyes, but I felt my throat tighten. I don't know, I said. I'm just grateful, I guess. To have people who show up because they want to, not because they're keeping score. No one corrected me. No one joked about what I owed them. Later, when everyone had left and the apartment was quiet again, I stood in the doorway and looked around. Empty cups on the coffee table, bits of wrapping paper under the couch, a half-melted candle on the counter. It was messy and imperfect in mine. The contrast made going home feel stranger every time. When I visited my parents' house, the air always seemed colder, no matter the season. Conversations rotated around Ethan like planets around a sun. His job, his business plans, his latest challenge. My work lived in the shadows between topics, something they acknowledged only when it could be used as a comparison point. Ethan's struggling right now, Mom would say over dinner. His industry is so unstable. At least your job is. What is it again? Computers? Software development, I'd remind her. Yes, that, she'd say, dismissive. You're steady. You don't need much. If I mentioned paying off a chunk of my loans or getting a new certification, it slid off them like water off wax. Meanwhile, Ethan's smallest efforts were praised as heroic. When he got a new car, there were photos sent to the family group chat. When I renewed my lease at a better rate, I got a thumbs-up emoji. Over time, the distance between my apartment and their house felt longer than the actual miles. I started visiting less, first skipping a few random weekends, then the occasional holiday. Work was an easy excuse. Sometimes it was true. Sometimes I just didn't have the energy to sit at that table and pretend I didn't hear the subtext in every sentence. You barely come around anymore, Mom complained over the phone once. Your brother makes time and he's the busy one. I could have pointed out who funded his free time, but I didn't. Instead, I mumbled something about deadlines and needing rest. The truth was, life was finally getting better without their hands on it. I could feel my own momentum building, small but real. Each bill paid on time. Each quiet night on my couch with a cheap bottle of wine and a streaming show felt like a tiny act of rebellion against the narrative I'd been handed. Still, that old ache lingered, a dull, familiar bruise under the skin. No matter how many times I told myself their approval didn't matter, some part of me still wanted them to look at my life and see more than a consolation prize. I was learning to live without their approval. What I didn't realize was they were already planning how to live off my effort. The year everything shifted, it almost felt like a mistake in my favor. I'd been at the company for a few years, slowly working my way up from fixing other people's bugs to leading small projects. Then my manager called me into a conference room with glass walls and a view of the parking lot and told me they were creating a new lead position. More responsibility, a team of my own, and a raise big enough that I had to ask him to repeat the number. On the train home, I stared at the email he'd sent to make it official, fingers hovering over the screenshot button. Part of me wanted to blast it into the group chat with my friends, to let them shower me with emojis and exclamation points. Another part of me thought of my parents. I ended up calling them that weekend. It was a casual Saturday, or as casual as it ever got in their house. I sat at their kitchen table, the same one where I'd signed that mysterious aid form years before. Mom was flipping through a coupon book. Dad scrolled on his phone. The TV murmured from the living room. So, I began, I got promoted. Mom didn't look up right away. That's nice, dear, she said. More work, I guess? And more money, I added. A decent jump, actually. I'll finally be able to knock out some of the high-interest loans. That got Dad's attention. He lifted his gaze from his screen, eyes sharpening. How much of a jump? He asked. I told him the number. The room changed temperature. Mom's eyebrows lifted, her coupon book slowly lowering to the table. Dad whistled softly, a sound I'd never heard directed at anything I'd done before. Well, well, he said. Look at you. Big shot. I shrugged, suddenly wishing I hadn't said anything. It's not that big. Cost of living. No, that's impressive, he cut in. You didn't tell us you were doing that well. You never asked. I almost said, but I bit it back. For the rest of the visit, their questions were unusually detailed. How stable was the job? Any stock options? What were my plans now that I finally had breathing room? The attention felt less like pride and more like an appraisal. A few weeks later, Mom called me on a Tuesday evening. I was in my apartment, a pot of pasta boiling on the stove, laptop open to my budgeting sheet. Hey, Mom, I answered, tucking the phone between my shoulder and ear. She skipped small talk. I hate to even bring this up, she began, which was how I knew she'd been rehearsing. But your brother is in a bit of trouble. My stomach tightened. What kind of trouble? Oh, you know how hard he's been working on that business, she said, already defensive. The economy, everything going up, it's just a rough patch. He needs a little help getting through it. Just a small loan to cover some expenses until things pick up. I turned down the stove. How small? She named an amount that wasn't small to me at all. It was nearly half my emergency fund, the one I'd built in careful, anxious layers. That's a lot, I said. For you, maybe, she replied lightly. But you're doing so well now. You said so yourself. You've always been so responsible with money. And you know your brother's not like that. He needs support. What about his savings? I asked. Or his partner? Or you and Dad? There was a pause. You know we've done everything we can for him, she said, slipping into the familiar script. We helped with his business, his wedding, his apartment. We're tapped out. We thought, since you finally have some extra, you could step up. Just this once. I stared at the steam curling up from the pot. Mom, I still have student loans, I reminded her. I'm trying to build some stability. If something happened. You're always so negative, she sighed. This is family. We helped you with school, and now you're acting like we're strangers. Your brother would do it for you. I doubted that, but I didn't say it. Instead, I took a breath. I can't, I said. Not that amount. I'm sorry. The warmth drained from her voice. Well, she said, clip now. I guess I misjudged how generous you are. I'll let your father know you're not interested in helping. She hung up before I could answer. The next day, Dad called. He didn't bother with a greeting. What's this I hear about you refusing to help your brother? He demanded. I didn't refuse to help, I said. I just can't give him thousands of dollars right now. I have obligations. Loans. Rent. I'm not rolling in cash. You're doing better than any of us ever did at your age, he snapped. You think we don't know what you make? Your mother told me. You're being selfish. I'm being careful, I replied. What if I lose my job? What if I get sick? I don't have anyone to bail me out. Ethan has you. Silence crackled on the line for a second. Family helps family, he said finally, voice low and hard. We invested in you too, you know. We didn't have to. We could have told you to figure it out on your own. But we didn't. And this is how you repay us. My grip on the phone tightened. You invested in me? I repeated. Yes, he said, as if I were slow. All those years, the roof over your head, the food, the college stuff. You think that was free? We put money into you. We expected, at the very least, you'd be there for your brother when it counts. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Because the images that flashed through my mind weren't of them writing checks or covering tuition. They were of loan statements with my name on them, of pay stubs, of text messages about being tapped out. What exactly did you invest in, Dad? I asked quietly. He scoffed. Don't play games. We'll talk about this properly next time you're over. But you need to remember where you came from. Don't forget who got you where you are. After he hung up, I sat on my couch, the phone still in my hand, heart beating too fast. Invested. Got you where you are. The words rolled around in my head like loose marbles, bumping into memories that didn't quite match. I thought of signing that form at the kitchen table, of being told the college fund had run out, of being reminded over and over how much Ethan had cost them and how little I supposedly had. That one word wouldn't stop echoing in my head. So I started digging. I didn't start with a plan. I started with a feeling. After that phone call, invested rattled around in my head like a loose screw. Every time I tried to focus on work, it slipped into my thoughts, dragging memories with it. The late nights, the lone notices, the conversations about being tapped out. The story I'd been told, that there was nothing left for me after Ethan, suddenly felt off. Not just unfair. Inconsistent. One Saturday, I pulled the old cardboard file box from the back of my closet. It was the one that moved with me from dorm to apartment, full of papers I'd been too afraid to throw away. Loan documents, tax returns, financial aid letters, bank statements. My past, reduced to thin slices of paper and fine print. I spread everything out on my small dining table. The hum of the fridge was the only sound as I sorted piles. Federal loans, private loans, university billing statements. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, only that I'd know it if I saw it. Halfway through a stack of old e-bills I'd printed in college, a line stopped me. Payment applied, family education savings account, disbursed in full. I frowned. I didn't remember ever having an account with that name. My savings in college had been whatever was left after rent and ramen. I pulled up my laptop and logged into the university's portal, surprised my old credentials still worked. The site looked dated now, but my account history was still there if I dug deep enough. Clicking through term by term, year by year, I found it again. Payment source, Visa, my full name, disbursed. My name, an account I'd never seen. Disbursed in full. My pulse picked up. I grabbed a notepad and copied down the reference number beside it, my handwriting wobblier than I wanted to admit. The next business day, during my lunch break, I called the university's financial aid office. I expected to be brushed off, told records that old weren't accessible. Instead, after some hold music and the sound of keyboard clacking, a woman came back on the line. Yes, I see it here, she said. There was a 529 type education savings plan used toward your tuition. A what? I asked. An education savings account, she repeated. It looks like it was set up in your name but owned by a custodian. That's common when parents or grandparents save for college. It was applied across several semesters. My mouth went dry. Who was the custodian? I asked, though I already knew. She read the name. My father's. Can you tell me the total amount? I asked. She hesitated. I can give you the total applied to your account, she said. For more detailed information, you'd have to contact the financial institution that held the plan. She gave me a figure anyway. It was not small. It was the kind of number that could have cut my loan burden in half, maybe more. The kind of number that would have made those years feel survivable instead of precarious. When I hung up, the room felt tilted. There had been a college fund. In my name. Used for my tuition, technically. And yet somehow, I'd still been told we were broke. That the fund had run out. That I was costing them less. I dug deeper. Old tax returns showed up in the bottom of the box, folded and refolded. I scanned line after line, looking for anything that matched what the financial aid office had said. An old 1099 form caught my eye. Interest income from an account with a bank I didn't recognize. I searched my email, digging back years, wading through long-abandoned newsletters and account alerts from places I hadn't visited in a decade. Buried under layers of promotions and password resets was a single, ancient email from that same bank, addressed to me. Statement available, custodial account. My name. I opened it with a shaking hand. The link inside was long dead, but the subject line alone was enough to make my stomach flip. Custodial account. My name. Why had I never seen a physical statement? Why had no one ever mentioned it? I called the bank's customer service line, half expecting to be told the account had been closed so long ago it might as well have never existed. After verifying an absurd amount of information, the representative confirmed it. Yes, there was a custodial account opened in your name as a minor, she said. It shows your father as the custodian. Is it still open? I asked, even though I knew the answer. No, she said. It was fully depleted and closed out years ago. My throat tightened. Can you tell me who opened it? I asked. She clicked on her keyboard. According to our records, it was funded by deposits from another account under your grandparents' names. The memo notes say, Education Fund for Grandchild Number 2. Grandchild Number 2. Me. Not Ethan. Me. The room seemed to shrink around me. I pictured my grandparents, now gone, carefully setting aside money, picturing it helping me one day. Picturing me walking into a bank office with them, maybe signing papers, smiling. That day had never happened. Instead, the money had gone somewhere else. Can you send me documentation? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Account opening forms, withdrawal history, anything you have? We can send what's available as scanned documents, she said. There may be a fee. I'll pay it, I said quickly. Email is fine. After I hung up, I sat very still at my kitchen table, surrounded by papers that suddenly looked different. What I'd always thought of as random financial clutter now formed a pattern. There had been an account, set up specifically for me. My father had been the legal custodian, which meant he controlled it, but he was supposed to use it for my benefit. Instead, I'd spent college counting tips and juggling shifts, being told there was nothing left, that I should be grateful for loans. I thought about the college ran out line. About the we had to use some of it earlier, said with a vague wave. About the way Ethan's life had been padded with support, while mine was lined with interest rates. I stared at the notepad where I'd scribbled numbers. The amount the university said had come from the education account, the approximate total from the bank, my loan balances from those years. The math didn't fully add up yet, but one fact was crystal clear, that it wasn't just that they'd favored my brother. It was that they'd used money meant for me, in my name, to build his life. I felt something go cold and hard inside my chest. A line I hadn't known existed suddenly snapped into focus. I wasn't just the scapegoat. I was the piggy bank. The longer I sat there, the less it felt like a misunderstanding, and the more it felt like a plan. A quiet, convenient one. One they'd counted on me never questioning, because I'd been trained to be grateful for scraps. My laptop dinged with a new email notification, jolting me back. It was from the bank, subject line, requested account documentation. Hands slightly trembling, I clicked it open and saw a list of attached PDFs, scanned forms, statements, records from years ago. There was one document I was looking for in particular, the one that would prove not just that the account existed, but how it was supposed to be used, and by whom. I downloaded everything and started opening them one by one. When the bank emailed me the scanned document, I realized my dad had written his own confession years ago. The first PDF I opened was just numbers, monthly balances marching downward, transaction dates blurring together. It was the second file that stopped me. Custodial account agreement, minor beneficiary, my full name. The scan was slightly crooked, the paper yellowed at the edges even through the screen. At the top was the bank's logo, sharp and official. Below it, my name in neat, typed letters. Under that, my date of birth. I was barely a year old when it was signed. The language was dense, but certain phrases glowed like warning signs. The custodian shall manage the property solely for the benefit of the minor named above. Funds may not be used for the benefit of any other individual, including siblings or relatives. Any withdrawal must be reasonably calculated to benefit the minor. There it was in black and white. The money was mine. Legally mine. My father's name appeared only under custodian, the person entrusted to act in my best interest, not his own. At the bottom of the page, his signature curved across the line in blue ink, bold and confident. Beside it, a notary stamp and signature pressed the whole thing into something more than a family promise. It was a contract, a legal obligation. I scrolled down. There was a section outlining consequences for misappropriation. Phrases like breach of fiduciary duty and subject to civil and criminal penalties under applicable law. I'd never seen those words on anything connected to my family before. They read like an instruction manual for accountability. Dad had signed it without hesitation. The next document was the withdrawal summary. It listed dates, amounts, and destination accounts. At first, the numbers just looked large. Then I started lining them up with my memory. A huge transfer in August of my freshman year of college, labeled as tuition payment. It matched the timeline of when I'd been told the college fund ran out. Another chunk in June a couple years later, description. Transfer to external account ending in numbers. That account number tickled something at the back of my brain. I scrolled through old emails again and found it in a forwarded confirmation Mom had once bragged about. The down payment on Ethan's first apartment. There it was. Money meant for grandchild number 2, withdrawn by my father as custodian and funneled into my brother's life. The more I compared dates, the clearer the pattern became. Whenever Ethan hit a big milestone, first semester at his expensive private school, upgrade to a better car, move into that downtown apartment, there was a corresponding dip in the account that bore my name. I stared at the screen, feeling nothing at first. Not anger, not sadness. Just a strange, suspended silence, like I'd stepped into a soundproof room. All those years he'd told me we were broke. That there was nothing left. That I was lucky to have loans. All the times he'd said, "We did everything we could for you," like it was a burden I should be grateful for. All those years he told me I cost too much. The truth was, I paid for my brother's life and my own. The grief came in a slow, dense wave, less like a punch and more like deep water rising steadily to my chest. My grandparents had set that money aside believing it would make my path easier. Instead, it had been siphoned off under my name to polish Ethan's already cushioned life, while I was left counting tips and living on instant noodles. I read the custodial agreement again, this time like a lawyer might. Each line was a reminder that this wasn't just morally wrong. It was explicitly forbidden. The document didn't leave room for family decisions, or we had to justifications. It was clear. The funds were to be used for my benefit only. I took a screenshot of the signature page and sent it to my friend Maya, who'd gone to law school and now spent her days in a world of contracts and clauses. "Can I call you?" I texted. She called within minutes. I forwarded her the PDFs, my voice oddly calm as I walked her through what I'd found. On the other end, I heard her exhale sharply. "Okay," she said. "First of all, I'm so sorry. This is a lot. Second, yes, this is a custodial account agreement. Your dad was a fiduciary. That means he had a legal duty to use the funds for your benefit. What about paying my tuition?" I asked. "The school said some of it went there." "That part is fine," she said. "But these other transfers? To other accounts? Especially if they funded your brother's stuff? That's bad. Potentially very bad. Can I do anything?" I asked. The question felt too small for the weight of the answer. There was a pause. "Legally, it's complicated," she said gently. "There's something called a statute of limitations. It depends on your state, when you found out, when the withdrawals happened. You'd need to talk to someone who specializes in this if you want to pursue it. But even if it's hard to sue now, this is still huge. It's proof. He can't claim he didn't know what he was doing. Proof. Not just my word against his. Not just my feelings. Cold, objective evidence with his signature on it." After we hung up, I sat at my desk and printed the custodial agreement. The printer whirred and spat out the pages, the ink still slightly shiny when I picked them up. I held the first page in my hands, tracing the outline of the notary seal, the curve of my father's name. This was the one paper he hadn't counted on me ever seeing. The one piece of the story he couldn't spin into a narrative about sacrifice and ungrateful children. He had written his own confession years ago. He just didn't expect his scapegoat to learn how to read it. I slipped the agreement into a clear plastic sleeve, then reconsidered and took it back out. It felt too formal, too bulky. I wanted it to look unimpressive at first glance. Just another sheet of paper, easy to underestimate. So I folded it neatly in half, pressing the crease with my thumb until it lay flat. I slid it into a plain manila folder with a few other printouts, the withdrawal summary, the university payment records, my loan statements, then took it back out again. In the end, I kept it simple. Just the agreement, folded once, tucked into the inside pocket of my bag. I didn't know exactly when I'd use it, but I knew I would. The grief I'd felt earlier began to cool into something sharper, more precise. Not explosive rage, not vindictive fantasies, just a quiet, surgical resolve. I wasn't going to scream at them or make a scene. I was going to be clear. I was going to be factual. And I was going to stop pretending we were having the same conversation when we talked about what I owed them. In the evenings, I did more research, reading articles about custodial accounts, forums where adults described discovering similar betrayals, legal blogs explaining fiduciary duties. Some stories ended in lawsuits, others ended in estrangement. Almost all of them carried the same flavor of shock, giving way to a grim kind of clarity. I didn't know yet which ending would be mine. But I knew one thing. I would never again sit at their table and accept their version of reality without question. So when they invited me to a family dinner to talk about my responsibility now that I was finally successful, I brought that one piece of paper with me. The text from my mother came on a Wednesday afternoon, sandwiched between a calendar reminder and a spam alert from my phone company. Hi, honey. We'd like to have a family meeting soon to talk about long-term support and planning. Can you come for dinner this Sunday? Love you. Long-term support and planning. I stared at the words for a long time. It wasn't an invitation. It was a soft-edged summons. No mention of Ethan, but I could feel him in the sentence like a shadow. His failing business, his debts, the rough patch that apparently had no end. In the past, that kind of message would have sent me spiraling. I'd have called 3 friends, rehearsed possible conversations, tried to figure out how to keep everyone happy. This time, I just set the phone down and looked at the manila folder on my desk. I picked it up, opened it, and checked the contents. The folded custodial agreement, the withdrawal summary with dates circled, the printouts from the university showing payments from the mysterious account, and a 1-page snapshot of my current finances. Not because I planned to show them my budget, but because I needed a reminder, for myself, of how far I'd come without their help. I texted back, I can come Sunday. As soon as I hit send, a little knot formed in my stomach. Not panic, exactly. More like the tight focus you get before a difficult exam. I wasn't going there to fight. I was going there to be clear. On Sunday afternoon, the city was quiet, the sky a flat gray that made everything look slightly underexposed. I dressed simply, jeans, a dark sweater, shoes that were comfortable enough to leave quickly if I needed to. No jewelry they could comment on as fancy. No new coat they could point to as evidence of my supposed extra cash. At my dining table, I laid the folder open one more time. The custodial agreement lay on top, folded in half, the crease clean and sharp. I ran my thumb along it and felt a steadiness settle in my chest. Alex leaned on the doorway, arms crossed, watching me. You sure you want to do this alone? They asked. I looked up. Yeah, I said. I think I have to. This is between me and them. They walked over, resting a hand on my shoulder. You don't have to prove anything, they said. You know that, right? You're not going there to convince them you're right. I know, I said. I'm not going to argue. I just need to say things out loud. With facts. And I need them to know I know. What's your line? They asked. It was a question we'd started using with each other. Where's the boundary, the point at which you walk away? If they start yelling, I leave, I said. If they call me ungrateful or crazy, I leave. If they try to twist this into me hurting them, I leave. I'm not staying to be their punching bag. They nodded. Good line. They squeezed my shoulder. Text me when you get there. And when you leave. If you need an excuse to cut it short, I'll call you with a work emergency. I smiled despite myself. You're too good at that. Years of practice, they said. Seriously, though, you're not the kid at their table anymore. You can stand up and walk out. Doors aren't symbolic, they open. After they left the room, I slipped the folded agreement into my bag, tucking it into the inner pocket where I kept my wallet. Close, but not obvious. I added the rest of the papers, more for my own confidence than anything else. Knowing they were there made my spine straighten. On the drive over, my hands stayed steady on the wheel. The radio played something forgettable. I let my mind run through possible scripts. What I'd say if they brought up Ethan. How I'd respond when they talked about responsibility and family. Each version ended the same way, with me refusing to sign anything, refusing to agree to any unspoken contracts I hadn't drafted myself. I parked a little down the street from their house, giving myself a short walk to clear my head. The front yard looked the same as always. The too bright porch light, the cracked stepping stone with our last name etched into it, the curtains just slightly parted. At the door, I paused, hand hovering over the bell. I took one long breath in and let it out slowly. I wasn't going there to ask for anything. I was going there to stop them from taking anything else. The door opened before I knocked. Mom smiled too widely, arms already reaching for a hug, eyes scanning my face for something, guilt maybe, or weakness. Behind her, I could hear the clink of dishes, the low rumble of Dad's voice, Ethan's laugh. Come in, she said. Dinner's almost ready. Your father's so happy you could make it. We have a lot to talk about. I bet we do, I said. I stepped over the threshold, the familiar smell of roast beef and rosemary wrapping around me like déjà vu. My bag felt heavier on my shoulder, the single folded sheet of paper in it like a secret heartbeat. The table was already set. The same heavy oak, the same too bright chandelier, the same wall of Ethan's photos watching over everything. This time, though, I wasn't sitting down as their dependent. I was sitting down as the only person in the room who knew exactly what my father had signed away and what he thought he'd gotten away with. And as I took my seat and reached for the salt, the night unfolded exactly as I knew it would. If you'd walked in at the beginning of that dinner, you might have thought we were just a normal family. Mom had gone all out, tablecloth ironed, candles lit, the good plates that only came out for holidays and guests. She fussed over the roast, bringing dish after dish to the table like she was auditioning for a cooking show. Her smile was a little too bright, her laugh a little too loud. Ethan was already seated when I walked in, scrolling on his phone. He looked up long enough to give me a nod. "Hey," he said. "Look who finally made time for the fam." Jenna sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, eyes flicking between us. She smiled when I greeted her, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. We started with small talk. Work, weather, traffic. Mom asked about my job in that vague way that made it clear she didn't really understand or care what I did. "Still doing computers?" she said. "Software development," I corrected gently. "I'm leading a team now." "That's nice," she said, already turning to refill Ethan's glass. "Ethan's been so stressed with his business." "Tell them about that, honey." Ethan sighed theatrically. "It's been rough," he said, pushing mashed potatoes around his plate. "Clients dragging their feet, overhead through the roof. It's like nobody understands how hard it is to build something from scratch. Some people just clock in and out and call it a day." His eyes flicked to me on that last sentence. The implication hung there, heavy and intentional. "I'm sorry it's been hard," I said evenly. "Running a business is risky." "Yeah, well," he said, "at least when I fall, I don't have a cushy safety net like some people." Jenna shifted in her seat. "Ethan," she murmured, a warning in her tone. He ignored her. "All I'm saying," he continued, "is that when I do well, everyone does well. I carry a lot." Dad chuckled, like this was all a charming quirk. "He's right," he said. "We've always said that. When one of us thrives, we all rise. That's what family is." Mom nodded emphatically, spooning more food onto my plate than I could possibly eat. "You should see how much your father and I have had to stretch to keep everyone afloat," she said. "We don't complain. We just do what needs to be done." I let their words wash over me. The narratives, so familiar they were practically scripts. Sacrifice, burden, unity. Always framed in a way that justified whatever they wanted from me next. Dinner dragged on like that, a mix of passive-aggressive barbs and overcompensating hospitality. Every time I thought the conversation might shift to neutral ground, Ethan steered it back to his struggles, his dreams, his endless need. It wasn't until dessert that the real purpose of the evening emerged. Mom brought out a store-bought pie she'd tried to pass off as homemade, the crust a little too perfect. As she set it down, Dad cleared his throat and pushed his chair back slightly, as if he needed more room to deliver his monologue. "Well," he began, folding his hands on the table, "we didn't just invite you here for food and fun." Jenna's shoulders tensed. Ethan leaned back, expression settling into something smugly expectant. Dad looked at me, then at Ethan, then back again, as though he were addressing a boardroom instead of his own children. "We're a family," he said. "And families survive by sticking together. When one of us is doing well, it's not just their win. It's all of ours. That's how we've always operated, intergenerational support, passing the torch, that kind of thing." Mom chimed in. "We've sacrificed so much over the years," she said, her voice softening. "For both of you. For your education, your opportunities. We didn't have anyone doing that for us." Dad nodded solemnly. "We made investments in our kids instead of ourselves," he said. "And now, finally, some of those investments are paying off." He looked directly at me. "You owe us your success," he said. "It's time you paid the family back." The sentence landed with a dull, familiar thud. Once it would have pierced me, sent me scrambling to prove my gratitude, to earn my place. Now it sounded like what it was, a claim. Mom slid a manila folder across the table, just like she'd slid extra food onto my plate. "We thought it would be easiest if we put things in writing," she said. "So there are no misunderstandings. Just a simple agreement, outlining how you can help with the mortgage, with Ethan's situation. Nothing unreasonable." The folder stopped in front of my plate, nudging my fork. I looked at it for a long beat, then reached down to my bag. I could feel all three of them watching me. Ethan with thinly veiled impatience, Mom with hopeful intensity, Dad with a smug certainty that he had cornered me. My fingers closed around the single folded sheet of paper in my bag. I pulled it out, set it on the table beside their folder, and smoothed the crease with one hand. "I'm glad you brought paperwork," I said quietly. I did too. The air in the room shifted. Mom's smile faltered. Jenna's eyes darted between the two stacks. Ethan rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on," he said. "Do we really have to make this dramatic?" I didn't look at him. I kept my gaze on my father. "You said you invested in me," I said. "That you sacrificed. That I owe you." He lifted his chin. "That's right. So I have a question," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. So I asked him, "How much do you think you invested in me, exactly?" Dad blinked at me, caught off guard by the question. He wasn't used to me asking for specifics. He was used to me nodding along. "What do you mean, how much?" he said. "We raised you. That's not something you can put a number on." "I'm not talking about diapers and peanut butter," I said. "You said you invested in me. Financially. So, what exactly did you put in?" He shifted in his chair, glancing at Mom like she might rescue him. "She didn't." "Well," he began, "we helped with your tuition, for one. We let you live at home during breaks. Food on the table, clothes, a roof over your head. And don't forget guidance. Advice. We could have pushed you out the door at 18, but we didn't. We supported you." I nodded slowly. "Okay. Tuition, housing during breaks, food, guidance. Let's start with tuition." He frowned. "What about it?" "You said you helped with it," I said. "Can you remind me how much you contributed?" He snorted. "You expect me to remember exact numbers from years ago? We used what we had. We had that small fund your grandparents started, and we put it toward your school. You know that." "That's interesting," I said. "Because I called the university. They said almost all of my tuition was covered by loans and scholarships. And a family education savings account listed under my name." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Here we go," he muttered. I ignored him. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin stack of papers, my loan breakdowns, and slid them across the table. "These are my student loan statements," I said. "Every semester. Every amount. You'll notice your names are not on them." Dad glanced at the pages, his eyes skimming without really reading. "We told you we used what we could from the college fund," he said. "It wasn't much. Just a little to fill the gaps. You're making a big deal out of nothing." "Right," I said softly. "A small fund. For the gaps." I let the silence stretch for a second, then placed another sheet of paper on top of the loans. This one was folded in half, the crease worn but crisp. I turned it so it faced him. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. He glanced down, annoyed. Then his eyes caught on the bank logo at the top, and the annoyance faltered. "It's from a bank," he said. "So what?" "Read the title," I said. His mouth tightened. "Custodial account agreement," he read aloud slowly. "Minor beneficiary. My name." Mom leaned forward, squinting. "What is this about?" she asked, her voice going high at the edges that I tapped the page. "This is the account my grandparents opened for me when I was a baby," I said. "The one you were custodian of. The one that was supposed to be used for my benefit. Only mine." Color started to drain from his face, like someone had pulled a plug. "I don't," he began. "Keep reading," I said. "The part about how the funds may not be used for the benefit of any other individual, including siblings or relatives. And the part about any withdrawal must be reasonably calculated to benefit the minor." He scanned the text, his jaw clenching. The notary's stamp near the bottom stared up at him like an eye. His own signature, in familiar blue ink, curved confidently across the designated line. "That's your signature, right?" I asked, my tone still calm. He didn't answer. "Because the bank confirmed it," I added. "And the university confirmed that funds from this account were used for my tuition. Which is fine. That's what it was for. What I'm curious about are the other withdrawals." Ethan frowned. "What is she talking about?" he asked, looking from Dad to Mom. Dad shoved the paper back toward me like it was contaminated. "You don't understand how these things work," he said. "We made decisions as parents. We did what was best for the family." "Funny," I said. "Because according to the withdrawal summary, you did what was best for Ethan." I pulled out another printout and laid it next to the agreement. Lines of transactions, dates, and amounts filled the page. I'd highlighted specific entries in yellow. "This," I said, pointing to a large withdrawal, "is August of my freshman year. Labeled as a tuition payment. That's the one you used to tell me the college fund had run out." I slid my finger down to the next highlighted line. This one, in June a couple years later, transfer to external account ending in numbers. That account number matches the confirmation email Mom forwarded me when you made the down payment on Ethan's first apartment. Jenna's eyes widened. Wait, she said quietly, turning to Ethan. Your apartment? And these here, I continued, tapping 2 more highlighted lines, line up beautifully with the tuition deadlines for Ethan's last 2 semesters at his private college. Same account, same custodian, same money that was supposed to be mine. Mom pressed a hand to her chest, her voice trembling. We're your parents, she said. We had to make choices. You don't know what it was like. We did the best we could. I'm not arguing about how hard your life was, I said. I'm talking about this document. The one where you agreed, in writing, that this money would be used for me. Not for the family. Not for your favorite child. For me. I looked at Dad. His face had gone a blotchy mix of red and pale. His eyes stayed fixed on the papers, as if he could burn holes in them. You didn't fund my success, Dad, I said quietly. You funded your favorite child with my future. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. That's not, he started. You got tuition, a car, an apartment, I said, turning to him. I got loans and lectures about being grateful. All while money that belonged to me, legally, was drained to prop up your life. That was our decision, Dad snapped, finally looking up. We're the parents. We had to look at the big picture. You had scholarships. You're more responsible. We knew you'd land on your feet. You didn't sacrifice for me, I said. You spent me. The room went very still. Even the clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Mom shook her head, eyes shiny. How can you say that? She whispered. After everything we've done. I gestured to the agreement. This isn't my opinion, I said. This is your signature. Your name under custodian. Your acknowledgement that this money was for my benefit only. And this, I tapped the withdrawal summary, is a record of you choosing, over and over, to benefit Ethan instead. Ethan shifted in his seat, suddenly uncomfortable. I didn't know about any of this, he said, looking at Dad. Did you seriously? Is she right? Dad slammed his palm on the table, making the plates rattle. Enough, he barked. You're twisting this. We used that money for the family. For necessities. We couldn't just let it sit there when your brother needed it. Necessities, I repeated. Private school? A nicer apartment? A better car? Those were choices. You decided he was worth investing in, and I was worth enduring. His glare sharpened. Watch your tone, he said. I am watching it, I replied. Very carefully. Because unlike you, I know what's at stake when someone signs their name on a contract. The facade of selfless parents of equal sacrifice had cracked. In the fissures, something uglier showed through. Entitlement, justification, the belief that my life was a resource they were entitled to redistribute as they saw fit. Mom reached for Dad's arm. Let's just calm down, she said. We're talking about old decisions. We can't go back in time. What matters is that we move forward as a family. That's why we need her help now. I leaned back slightly, feeling the weight of the folded agreement in my hand like an anchor. I'm moving forward, I said. But not the way you think. Dad's mouth twisted, anger finally overtaking the fleeting fear in his eyes. He straightened, shoulders squaring, as if preparing for battle. That's when he stopped pretending, I thought, watching his face harden. That's when he stopped pretending and finally said what he really thought of me. Dad's face went from blotchy to outright red, like someone had flipped a switch inside him. So that's what this is, he snapped. You dig up some old paperwork just to hurt us? To throw it in our faces after everything we've done? I didn't flinch. I'm not trying to hurt you, I said. I'm trying to name what already happened. You made choices with money that wasn't yours. It was all for the family, he shot back. You think we were out buying yachts? We were keeping this house, keeping things running, giving your brother a shot. You would have wasted it anyway. At least this way it did some good. Mom nodded vigorously. We had to make choices, she said, voice trembling. You were always so stable. Your brother needed more help. He had real potential. We couldn't let that go to waste. I almost laughed at that, real potential, as if I'd been some generic off-brand background character in my own life. You keep saying family like it's a magic word that excuses anything, I said. But legally, that's not how this works. That account wasn't family money. It was mine. You were the custodian, Dad. Not the owner. You had a duty to act in my best interest. Dad's eyes narrowed. Oh, so now you're a lawyer? No, I said. But I talked to one. And I've read enough to know this isn't just morally ugly. It's a breach of fiduciary duty. A fancy way of saying, you broke the rules you agreed to when you signed that paper. His jaw clenched. You went to a lawyer, he repeated, like I'd confessed to arson. I went to someone who understands what this document means, I said, tapping the agreement. Because you've made it very clear you don't respect my understanding of anything unless there's an authority attached to it. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Look, maybe this is getting blown out of proportion, he muttered. It was a long time ago. We can't change it now. I turned to him. You don't have to say anything, I said. But don't pretend you wouldn't care if the roles were reversed. He dropped his gaze. I didn't know, he said quietly. I don't know what I thought. That was as far as his courage went. Dad seized on that. See, he said, gesturing toward Ethan. He didn't ask for this. We did what we thought was best. Maybe we made some mistakes, fine. But you, he pointed at me, you're successful now. You have a good job, a nice place. You're doing better than any of us. That's what matters. He leaned forward, eyes hard. So you're going to help this family whether you like it or not. There it was. The truth, stripped of sentiment. Not a request. A directive. I sat back, feeling strangely calm. It was like watching a puzzle finally snap together. Every oddly shaped piece of my childhood clicking into place around this central image of entitlement. I don't owe my abusers a return on investment, I said. Silence dropped over the table like a curtain. Mom gasped. How dare you use that word, she whispered. We're your parents. Exactly, I said. Parents are supposed to protect their kids' futures, not drain them to fund someone else's. You didn't just favor Ethan. You used what was meant for me to build his life, then told me to be grateful for the loans I took out to build my own. Dad slammed his hand down again. We raised you, he growled. We fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head. You act like we left you on the street. Newsflash, that's what parents do. You don't get a medal for it. I'm not asking you for a medal, I said. I'm asking you to stop pretending that basic parenting cancels out everything that came after. You don't get to misuse my money, then hand me a bill labeled gratitude 20 years later. His lip curled. All this over some account and a few $1,000s, he said. You're really going to throw your family away for that? It's not just the money, I said. It's the story. You've been telling me my whole life that I cost less, that I should be thankful for scraps, that I owed you for every inch of progress I scraped together. Now I know the truth. You built that story on funds you quietly siphoned out of my name. Mom wiped at her eyes, though no tears had actually fallen. We were just trying to keep everyone afloat, she said. You're twisting it. You're turning us into villains. I met her gaze. You turned yourselves into villains when you decided my future was expendable as long as Ethan stayed shiny. Dad shook his head slowly, like he was disappointed in me for failing some secret test. You always were dramatic, he said. You take everything so personally. We're talking about moving forward. About what you can do for this family now. Not rehashing the past. That's convenient, I said. You want me to forget the contract you signed, but remember a debt I never agreed to. You want me to pretend the account never existed, but accept that I owe you indefinitely. His eyes flashed. We are your family, he said. We're all you've got. If you walk away from us over this, you'll regret it. I felt a strange lightness settle over me then, like the moment you realize the monster under the bed is just a pile of forgotten clothes. Ugly, but not all-powerful. I won't, I said quietly, because I didn't lose my family tonight. I just stopped pretending I had won. For a moment, no one moved. Mom's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Ethan stared at the table. Dad looked at me like I'd grown another head. They didn't look guilty. They looked cornered. That was the part that cut the deepest, not just what they'd done, but how little remorse they felt. The panic in their eyes wasn't about hurting me. It was about losing access to me. To my income, my stability, the version of me who would have signed whatever they slid across this table. I saw it clearly then. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as an asset that had stopped performing. So that's it, Dad said finally. You're going to hold this over our heads forever? Threaten us with lawyers? Turn your back on the people who got you where you are. I got me where I am, I said. With scholarships, loans, and a lot of nights you never saw because you were too busy telling yourself a story about your sacrifices. I gathered the papers in front of me, stacking them neatly. I'm not here to threaten you, I said. I'm here to explain where I stand, and what will happen if you keep trying to guilt me into fixing problems I didn't create. Their faces blurred slightly at the edges, like a photograph being taken out of focus. So I told them exactly what I'd decided and what would happen if they pushed me any further. I took a breath, feeling the edges of the papers under my fingertips, and let my voice level out. Here's what's going to happen, I said. I'm not paying your mortgage. I'm not paying Ethan's debts. I'm not covering any family expenses now or in the future. My income is mine. Mom recoiled like I'd slapped her. How can you say that? She whispered. We're just asking for a little help. You have so much. I have exactly what I worked for, I said. And I'm still paying for what you chose to spend in my name. That's enough. Dad opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. I'm not done, I said. I also want to be clear about this account. What you did with it was wrong. I know it, you know it, and any competent lawyer would know it. But I'm not interested in dragging this through court, unless you force me to. He snorted. You wouldn't dare. Try me, I said softly. Right now, I'm choosing not to pursue legal action. Not because you deserve mercy, but because I deserve peace. That choice comes with conditions. I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes. Condition 1, I continued. You stop. No more calls asking for money. No more guilt trips about investments and family obligations. No more folders slid across tables. If you need financial help, you figure it out without me. Mom shook her head, tears finally spilling. You're putting conditions on helping your own parents? I'm putting conditions on my sanity, I replied. Condition 2, you do not misrepresent this to anyone else. You don't tell relatives I'm ungrateful and refusing to pay you back for some imaginary sacrifice. You don't leave out the part where you spent my college fund on someone else. Dad scoffed. And how exactly are you going to police that? I slid the custodial agreement back toward myself, then tapped it with one finger. By sending this, I said, and the withdrawal history, and the university records, to anyone who needs to see it. If I hear that you're smearing me to extended family, or painting me as the villain who abandoned you over money, I will forward every document to them. And if I have to, I'll include my grandparents' estate lawyer too. I'm sure they'd be very interested to see how their gift was used. The color drained further from his face at that. You wouldn't drag your grandparents into this, he said. They're already in it, I said quietly. They just aren't alive to see how their trust was twisted. But the people who manage what's left of their estate are very much alive. Ethan shifted again. This is getting extreme, he muttered. You're threatening to blow up the whole family over. I'm not blowing anything up, I cut in. I'm just done being your silent collateral. You all chose your actions. I'm choosing my boundaries. I gathered the stack of papers into a neat pile and slipped them back into my bag. You taught me contracts matter when it was about my loans, I said. This is the contract that matters to me. Dad leaned forward, knuckles white on the edge of the table. So what? You're just walking away, he demanded. Leaving us high and dry? After everything. I'm walking away from being your safety net, I said. I'm walking away from conversations where love is just a down payment on future demands. You can still call me to say hello, to share news, to talk like normal people. But the moment money enters the conversation, I hang up. If you show up at my door asking for help, I close it. Mom's face crumpled. You don't mean that, she sobbed. You're just angry. I'm not angry, I said, surprised at how true that felt. I'm done. The words settled over us, solid and irreversible. Here's the last part, I added. If you try to harass me, if you threaten me, if you push this again, those documents go to a lawyer. No more discussions. No more chances. You don't get to rob me twice, once of the money, and again of the right to set limits. For a moment, all I heard was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the hallway clock. Then the reactions came, loud, overlapping, messy. Mom's crying turned theatrical, her voice rising as she called me cruel, cold, brainwashed by outsiders. Ethan muttered something about me, making it all about myself. Dad's expression hardened into something uglier than anger. Contempt. My dad tried one last tactic, shame. Dad recovered first. You're really going to throw away your family over money, he sneered. Over a technicality in some dusty old contract? Do you hear yourself? I met his gaze. I'm not throwing away my family over money, I said. I'm stepping away from people who treated me like money. Mom's crying ratcheted up a notch, high and shaking. This isn't you, she wailed. You were always such a good child. So considerate. Who put these ideas in your head? Your friends? That lawyer? They don't care about you like we do. They care enough not to spend my future without asking, I said. Ethan cleared his throat, finally looking at me instead of his plate. Look, he said, maybe everyone just needs to cool off. We can work something out, like a payment plan or, I don't know. There has to be a middle ground. There it was, not an apology, not an acknowledgement, just another angle on the same ask. No, I said gently. There doesn't. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping softly against the floor. The sound felt louder than it should have. I stood, reaching for my bag and sliding the strap over my shoulder, the weight of the papers a familiar anchor. Where do you think you're going? Dad demanded. Home, I said. And after tonight, I won't be back here for a while. Maybe ever. Mom hiccuped between sobs. You don't mean that, she gasped. You can't just cut off your own parents. That's unnatural. What was unnatural, I said, was treating your child like an emergency fund. This is a correction. I looked at each of them in turn. I won't be attending holidays, birthdays, or family meetings, I said. I won't be picking up phone calls that turn into demands or guilt trips. If you ever want a relationship with me again, it starts with a real apology and taking responsibility for what you did. Not excuses. Not we did our best. Ownership. Dad scoffed. So that's your condition. We grovel, and you grace us with your presence. I don't want you to grovel, I said. I want you to be honest for once. With me, with yourselves, with everyone else. If you can't do that, then there isn't a version of this where I keep coming back just to be drained. Ethan shook his head. You're being extreme, he muttered. This is still your family. I looked at him, really looked at him. The brother whose life had been cushioned by the invisible sacrifices taken from mine, the one who still couldn't see the problem if it meant losing his safety net. I hope someday you understand why this isn't okay, I said. But that's your work, not mine. Mom reached out as if to grab my arm, then dropped her hand when I stepped back. Her face twisted. If you walk out that door, don't expect us to be here when you decide to come crawling back, she said. I almost smiled. The threat wasn't new. It had just never landed with less weight. I'm not planning on crawling, I said. I'm planning on walking. And then I did. The hallway felt narrower than I remembered. The wall of Ethan's photos watched me pass for what might be the last time. I didn't pause to look for myself in the background. At the front door, I hesitated just long enough to listen. Behind me, Mom's crying had turned into angry sobs. Dad's voice was a low, bitter rumble. Ethan said something I couldn't make out. None of it was for me anymore. I stepped outside and closed the door gently behind me. The night air was cool and surprisingly still. For a moment, I just stood on the front porch, breathing. The house glowed behind me, a familiar silhouette against the dark, but it felt like a stage set I'd finally stepped off of. Grief pressed at the edges of my chest, sharp and insistent. This was, in a way, a kind of death, the end of the version of my family I'd spent years trying to pretend I had. But woven through the sadness was something else, relief. A sense of space opening up where obligation used to sit. On the sidewalk, under the dim streetlight, I pulled out my phone and typed a text. It's done, I wrote. The reply came almost immediately. Proud of you. Come home, Alex sent back. Home. Not their house. Mine. I walked to my car, each step feeling both heavy and strangely light. When I slid into the driver's seat, I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look like someone who'd just detonated their life. I looked tired, clear-eyed, older maybe in a way that had nothing to do with age. As I pulled away from the curb, the house shrank in the mirror until it was just another point of light on a street full of them. Not a destination, just a place I used to live. I expected them to calm down and reach out. They did reach out, but not the way I thought. The first sign that my parents hadn't taken my conditions seriously came a week later, in the form of a text from my cousin Lily. Hey, she wrote. Are you okay? I've been hearing some weird stuff. My stomach sank. What kind of stuff? I asked. She hesitated before replying. Your mom told my mom that you refused to help them when they were in trouble, she wrote, and that you're threatening to sue them over nothing. It didn't sound like you, so I wanted to check. I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back. I'm okay. There's more to it, but I'm not ready to get into it right now. Thanks for asking, though. For a while, that was my approach, silence. I threw myself into work, into dinners with friends, into quiet evenings with Alex where we watched shows and didn't talk about my parents unless I brought it up. The urge to defend myself, to send mass emails with attachments, burned hot at first, then cooled into a dull ache. Let them talk, I thought. I know what's true. But smear campaigns have a way of seeping through cracks. An aunt unfollowed me on social media. An uncle who'd always been warm sent a stiff, formal message about hoping we can all remember the importance of family in difficult times. A younger cousin DM'd me to say my mom had cried on the phone about how money had changed me. I stayed quiet until the day Lily called instead of texting. Okay, she said as soon as I picked up. I can't keep pretending I don't know something's off. I just got off the phone with your mom. She's telling everyone you're trying to take them to court and leave them homeless. Is any of that true? I closed my eyes. No, I said. I'm not suing them. I told them I wouldn't, as long as they left me alone and stopped lying. Lying about what? She asked. I hesitated. There was a part of me that still wanted to protect the image of family for everyone else, to keep the ugliness contained. But that instinct, I realized, was the same one that had kept me quiet for years. Do you really want to know? I asked. Yes, she said firmly. If I'm going to be in the middle of this, I'd like to know what this actually is. So I told her. Not every detail, not every wound, but the bones of it. The account, the custodial agreement, the withdrawals that lined up with Ethan's milestones, the night at the table. She listened without interrupting, the occasional sharp inhale her only reaction. When I finished, there was a long pause. Can you send me that paper? She asked quietly. I did. I snapped a clear photo of the agreement's first page. The bank logo, my name, the clause about benefiting only the named minor, my dad's signature. A minute later, my phone buzzed again. Oh my God, she said. He really signed this. Yep. And they used it for Ethan? Yep. I could hear her pacing through her apartment, the faint echo of her footsteps. They've been saying you're overreacting, she said. That you're twisting things. But this is not nothing. I know, I said. That's why I drew a line. She let out a long breath. Okay, she said. Well, for what it's worth, I believe you. And I'm not going to sit there and nod along the next time they bring it up at a barbecue. Something loosened in my chest. Thank you, I said. In the weeks that followed, the family split in quiet, telling ways. Some relatives doubled down on my parents' version. They sent me messages filled with vague platitudes about forgiveness and remembering who was there for you as a child. Most of them carefully avoiding any mention of specifics. A few stopped contacting me altogether, aligning themselves with the louder narrative because it was easier than questioning it. Others, like Lily, started creating small pockets of resistance. When my mother tried to hold court on the phone, painting me as an ungrateful, money-obsessed traitor, they asked uncomfortable questions. Didn't the grandparents leave something for both kids? Why was the account in her name then? The calls got shorter after that. I didn't orchestrate any of it. I just lived my life and, when asked directly by someone I trusted, told the truth with receipts. Ethan sent me one text during that time. Wish things were different, it read. This whole situation sucks. I stared at it, waiting for the second message. The one that would say, I'm sorry I benefited from something that was meant for you. Or, I'll talk to them. We'll make this right. It never came. After a while, I replied, Me too. He didn't respond. Bit by bit, my circle narrowed and solidified. The people who stayed in my life were the ones who could tolerate discomfort in the name of truth, who didn't demand I set myself on fire to keep family peace warm. The ones who, when I showed them the ugly parts, didn't flinch away or tell me to minimize it for everyone's comfort. It hurt to see who chose the easier story. It also clarified who had really seen me all along. Meanwhile, my life, the one they claimed to have built, kept growing without them. By the time a year had passed, my life felt less like a battle and more like something I was quietly, steadily building. The numbers told part of the story. My debt spreadsheet, once a wall of red, had patches of green creeping in. One of my highest interest loans was gone completely. The others were smaller, less terrifying. I had an emergency fund that was more than a joke. I even had a separate savings account labeled Future Home, an idea that had once felt as far-fetched as a vacation on Mars. Eventually, that label turned into a set of keys. It wasn't a dream house, just a modest condo on the edge of the city, with mismatched flooring and a slightly outdated kitchen. But when I stood in the empty living room on the day I closed, my name on the deed, I felt something unfurl in my chest that I didn't have a word for. Stability, maybe. Or ownership, in the truest sense. We celebrated in that half-furnished space a few weeks later for my birthday. Friends brought folding chairs and floor cushions, balancing plates of takeout on their knees. Lily drove in with a car full of mismatched dishes and a plant she insisted would make the place feel alive. Alex strung a cheap banner across the wall that drooped slightly in the middle, making us laugh every time we looked at it. There was no roast beef, no formal table, no unspoken agenda. Just people who wanted to be there because they liked me, not because they were keeping a ledger. At some point in the night, Alex tapped a spoon against a glass, the sound ringing through the room. "Okay," they said, standing in the middle of my living room. "I'm making a toast, and you're all going to deal with it." Everyone laughed and raised whatever they were holding. Wine glasses, soda cans, a mug of tea. "Two," Alex said, turning to me. "The most stubbornly kind person I know, who somehow managed to drag themselves through a minefield and still came out on the other side willing to build something soft. To a year of paying off debts nobody helped with, buying a home nobody co-signed, and choosing people who don't demand a return on investment." There was a murmur of agreement, the kind that comes from people who've watched the whole arc, not just the highlight reel. Lily added, "To someone who taught me that love without honesty is just PR, and that you can actually say no to blood relatives and the planet keeps spinning." We clinked glasses, plastic and glass and ceramic knocking together with a cheerful lack of coordination. I felt heat rise to my face, but it wasn't the hot, ashamed flush I used to feel at my parents' table. It was just being seen. Nobody brought up what I owed them. Nobody dangled their support like a loan. They told stories about my terrible college haircut, the time I fell asleep on a video call with my camera still on, the way I insist on alphabetizing my spices. I was a person in their lives, not a project they expected dividends from. Later, when the crowd had thinned and only a few of us were left, I stood alone in the kitchen for a moment, leaning against the counter. The hum of conversation was a soft backdrop, the kind that made the silence in my head feel full instead of lonely. It struck me then how much space I'd gotten back. Without constant calls from my parents, without the never-ending effort of anticipating their moods and managing their narratives, my brain felt quieter. I slept better. I didn't rehearse imaginary explanations in the shower anymore, or play out fantasy conversations where they finally understood and approved of me. I still worked hard, but the grind felt different. I wasn't chasing a moving target labeled good enough in their eyes. I was aiming at goals I'd set for myself. Paying off a loan became less about proving I was responsible and more about freeing future me from past obligations. Taking on a new project at work was about curiosity and growth, not ammunition for the next family dinner. Success, for the first time, felt like it belonged to me. Not as evidence, not as leverage, not as a bargaining chip. Just as the natural outcome of effort plus time, plus a bit of luck and help from people who didn't keep a scoreboard, that I thought about the version of myself who'd sat at that old kitchen table, pen in hand, signing a form she didn't understand because she wanted to believe, "We'll take care of the rest," wasn't a lie. I wished I could reach back and tell her that one day she'd sign papers that actually protected her. Leases and deeds and contracts where her name meant control, not vulnerability. Family, I'd learned, could be something you assembled intentionally. It could be friends who showed up on moving day with boxes and pizza, a cousin who pushed back on gossip, a partner who said, "You're not crazy," when the world tried to convince you otherwise. It could be a small circle instead of a big, loud clan. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in safety. Sometimes, late at night, I still heard my dad's voice in my head. "You owe us your success." Now, I answered it differently. Sometimes I catch myself replaying pieces of this story and wondering how it sounds if you haven't lived anything like it. Maybe parts of it seem extreme. The legal documents, the no contact, the idea of walking away from your own parents over money. But here's the thing I had to learn the hard way. It was never just about the money. When a parent steals from you or quietly sabotages your future to prop up someone else's, they're not just moving numbers around. They're telling you, in a language you can't ignore, what you're worth to them. They're saying your needs are negotiable, your future is collateral, and your gratitude is owed forever. And then, when you finally build something in spite of that, they show up with their hands out and call it family. I had to unlearn a lot of things to get out from under that. Like the idea that setting a boundary is an act of cruelty. Or that loyalty means swallowing whatever you're fed as long as it comes from people who share your DNA. Here's what I believe now. Family is the people who don't demand a return on investment for loving you. The ones who don't measure your value in tuition checks or favors owed. The ones who are proud of you because you're you, not because you finally became profitable. Loyalty at its healthiest is a two-way street. It's not a contract you sign at birth, agreeing to pay interest on every meal and bedtime story for the rest of your life. It's something both sides maintain with honesty, respect, and the ability to hear the word no without turning it into a weapon. Walking away from my parents wasn't easy. It still isn't some days. Grief doesn't care how justified you are. It just knows you lost something you wanted to believe you had. There are moments when I miss the idea of parents more than I miss the actual people. But staying in a place where my worth was always negotiable, that wasn't love. That was harm dressed up as obligation. I don't owe my success to the people who tried to own it. I owe it to the version of me who kept going anyway. The kid who studied by lamplight while everyone else slept. The 20-year-old who went to work instead of going home for the summer. The person who opened a scanned PDF one afternoon and realized they weren't crazy. They were being used. If someone tells you that you owe them your life, check where they've been taking withdrawals. Look at how they treat your boundaries. Look at whether their support came with strings so tangled you can't move without choking. Look at whether family only comes up when they want something. If any of this sounds uncomfortably familiar, if you've been the scapegoat, the backup plan, the silent ATM, I'm sorry. You deserved better. And you still do. You're allowed to ask hard questions. You're allowed to look at the receipts, literal or metaphorical, and decide that the story you were given doesn't match the facts. You're allowed to say no, even if your voice shakes, even if they call you selfish, even if you're the first one in your family to break the script. Boundaries aren't betrayal. They're self-defense. If you've been in a similar position, if your loyalty has been used as a debit card, I'd honestly like to hear your story. Share it in the comments if you feel safe doing that. You never know who might read it and realize they're not alone. And if this hit closer to home than you expected, and you want to hear more stories like this, stories about toxic families, hidden betrayals, and quiet, dignified justice, feel free to subscribe. I'll keep telling them, not because I enjoy the hurt, but because sometimes hearing someone else draw a line gives you permission to draw your own. At the end of the day, you don't exist to balance anyone else's ledger. You're allowed to belong to yourself.